I'm going to start and then intro you, and then you can go.
Great. All right.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, guys. So the next band call, we've got Jaymison Jones and crushing it for our meeting today. I'm really excited about this message. He's going to be talking about scaling an events program, CSP management, events team development, and just all things when it comes around to really seeing the bigger picture and vision. Jaymison started back in 2003. He's personally sold over 250 grand, held pretty much every title in the company. And fun fact, Jaymison was actually somebody I talked to before making the decision to go district manager, and being a father out of wedlock and somebody that I could really connect with. And since then, we've just built incredible conversation. Every time I see this guy and his wife and his kids, I just get fired up, and somebody that I wish that we were in the same region so that we could connect a lot more. But when I thought about putting together the band, Jaymison was the first one that came to mind, no doubt. Multiple time Rolex winner, over 1 million, over 2 million, multiple years in a row now. Getting promoted to DVL in 2014, DVC in 15, and officially DVM in 2016. Hall of Fame manager, over $26 million in sales. And what I really loved is that his division last year did over 300 plus events. I think it's actually closer to 400. And they just really are in a position where they're just scaling the business. They're adding more layers to it, and really just in a growth mindset with everything he does. Just found out today he's coaching both indoor soccer and he's doing another league with Little League or T-ball.
T-ball, yeah.
Just crazy. Just personally, just a great coach and great father. Professionally, just an incredible leader, and then just an amazing home life too. So we're fired up to learn from you, and thank you for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks again for letting me talk about this. You know, when I think about the events program and the FSM opportunity, it really is a great opportunity for many, many people. And, you know, I remember hearing other division managers talk about the difference between taking the management route and taking the sales route. And, you know, for me, I generate a lot of personal fulfillment in helping and giving back and coaching. And as much as I thought I was good at and I enjoyed the selling game, I loved leadership. And I never thought poorly of like the FSM or CSP opportunity, because I do think it's just such a great vehicle. And it's like we have these people that can create these part-time incomes, or these or also these full-time incomes working part-time. And it's, you know, it's really exciting to see that, you know, in my office last year, we had multiple people earn over 100 grand. We had a couple people earn over 150. We had one guy that earned over $250,000 last year. And it's like, for that on a sales rep position, right, and having the autonomy, the freedom, the flexibility to kind of run their own business and work independently, I think it's amazing. And I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with like Robert Kiyosaki, and he talks about like the cash flow quadrant and like which quadrant you want to be in, and kind of transitioning from that employee to self-employed to business owner. And when I looked at the district manager opportunity, I found myself in this position where I'm like, it kind of feels like I own a job sometimes as a district manager. And I'm like, well, how do we like separate that? Like, how can we systemize different things? And one of the things that really appealed to me about having a team of FSMs and CSPs is really the leverage that occurs in lifestyle and in business, right? It's like creating consistency for the business, right? So it becomes a system that is almost like working on its own without me having to put a lot of effort into it, right? And ideally, that's what we want out of becoming business owners, right? Like my goal early in life as an entrepreneur was never to make millions and millions of dollars and take over the world. It was like make enough money that I can create freedom so that I can coach indoor soccer, I can coach t-ball, I can take my kids to school in the morning, I can pick them up from school, and I can be the person that's there with my family. And that's really the main thing that I was like working towards, right? Like I wanted to create a system in a business that provided freedom and flexibility, and then having that business and system work without me needing to be there all the time. That was the focus. So when I think about like the purpose of the events team, the purpose of the organization was to create more exposure and purchasing opportunities of Cutco to customers in my local area. So in the division, we wanted to create those opportunities for customers to be able to buy more. And more importantly, like in order to do that, we had to create more opportunities for sales reps to create sales volume and also sales consistency. So when I was looking at this, I kind of aimed at it from like a problem and then potential solution perspective, right? So I'm looking at the problem, and the first problem was rep retention at a certain point, right? So my manager used to call it the senior advisor slump. I don't know if you guys are kind of familiar with this process, but it's like rep gets to about 10K. A lot of their like layup sales or their network is not quite as like easy. Some of them make a really great transition to like calling referrals and working with those people, but then others kind of struggle and they don't know what to do. And I found that it's not so much the income, because they're at this point, they're working less and making similar income. But I found that when there's a lack of work, right, or consistency, right, if they're not working, they're thinking. And if somebody doesn't really have a lot of focus on what they're trying to create, they're not thinking positively usually, right? They're being influenced, or Dan Cassetta calls it SNIOP, right? Subjected to the negative influence of other people. And it's funny because I wanted to look at that problem and say, we have these really talented salespeople that have the opportunity to earn significant amount of income at their own pace, while at the same time, this creates a lot of leverage for the business owner. So what systems can we put in place? And that's kind of like the events team, right? Like, this is great. So I found that the biggest problem for those reps that are right around 10, 20, 30K in that window, it's like they're not doing enough appointments for whatever reason. They need consistent income despite the large spikes, right? So it's like, we'll have reps that will earn 2,000 during a push period. And then I don't know if you've ever had those push reps that they'll push and then they'll do like nothing for 3 weeks. And then they're like, oh, I got to do something. And then they're like, oh, I got to hit bonus. And it's like, they kind of have this like roller coaster. And what's really funny, it's like their performance is followed by like an emotional roller coaster every Thursday when the email comes out from commissions. It's like that roller coaster follows right along with it, right? So it's like, how do we create consistency and keep them active so that they're focused on the right things? So the solution is like, we'll get them selling more. And to kind of give you a chronological breakdown of how the events team developed, and I'm actually just reading off of a thing. It's called Band's Event Discussion. So if you got the email, it's in there. But this is pretty much everything that I'm going to cover, and then there's supplemental information that we can like bounce around to. But my first year before I was a division manager in 2013, the NorCal division did 75 events. So this was while I was a DM, and they did $457,000 in booth sales. The following year, that grew to 112. That was my first year as a coordinator. And that was really my first plan of action. It's like, how do we get more opportunities, right? So we grew by about 40 events, which when that occurred, I was like, yes, this is a big win. And then we grew by about 100 grand in business in the booth. Well, we also recognized that there was still a lot on the table. There's like a lot of stuff that was still available out there. So in 2015, we grew that to 163 events, and we did 827. In 2016, we actually went down in sales a little bit, but one of the big things that happened that year is they cut my territory. They like kind of like shifted some things, and we lost some major events. One event was consistently doing 80K a year, and 2 other events were doing 40K. So we lost over $100,000 in events just like that with the territory shift. So our events team, although went down in business, they really were increasing because they did it without those events counting for our events team. We went down a little bit again because of, again, another territory shift. And then in 2018 was really where we made this big quantum leap, right? And quantum leap in the number of events, we did 203 events, and we did over $1 million. So $1,070,000 in event sales. And we actually switched coordinators in August. I'm going to talk about the importance of a coordinator and what I thought was right, and now what I feel more confident is actually the right direction with my coordinator. And when I had the right coordinator, now all of a sudden I have somebody who's in alignment with what I'm trying to grow, what I'm trying to do, the benefit of every level of our business, right? Because I found sometimes we had these high-powered CSPs. They were saying, well, you know, there's DMs and there's CSPs, and it's like they don't work together. They're totally different. And it's like, that's not true, because in order for us to work these events, we need district managers that have, you know, people working in their office and vice versa. And when you find a leader that can partner with you that has an abundance mindset, it really does shift the culture and the way that they view things. And then this year we did over 300 events. We did 307 events, and we did $1.3 million in booth sales. So that's just reps at the booth. And as you, if you're looking at this document, you'll see some some numbers. And what's really interesting is most of these representatives were around when I took over, and most of them were doing either less than 50. And my really high performers like Jeremy had his best year ever, and he had just done 225. And Danny, when I took over the division, his best year ever was under 130. Right. So these guys made some very big quantum leaps. And you'll see here that like Jeremy last year did 500,000. And my previous coordinator had some conflict with a guy like Danny. He's like, he's a CGC. He doesn't belong in the booth. And I'm like, no, Jeremy sells Cutco. He sells a lot of CGC, but he sells Cutco, right? Like he does it all. So like, why wouldn't we like have him a part of our team if that's what he wants to do, right? We're never going to force somebody to do something, but if he's requesting, why wouldn't we accommodate one of our top performers? And that was one of the differences I had with like my old coordinator and my new one. My new one's like, yeah, if he's good, let's get him in the booth, right? And sure enough, this last year, Jeremy did over $100,000 in booth sales personally. And this was his first year back on our events team full time. So that's to supplement his CGC business. And he did over $500,000 in sales last year. Eric, strictly CGC rep. Danny did over 300,000. That was my old coordinator. So there was a little bit of a like, I'm taking a step backwards, but it was also one of these things where I'm like, Danny, you know, we're not necessarily like serving the team the right way. And you're obviously really stressed out about this. And it ended up being this win-win because although he went down slightly, he went from 320 to 303. He went down slightly, didn't have coordinator pay, but he also worked only about half of the events that he did the year before. So in terms of like average volume, this made a really big difference. And same with like our service events program. So we've been adding on service events at the end of every single event, right? On Monday and Tuesday after event, that's where people get their knives sharpened. So if somebody comes up to the booth and needs their knives sharpened, like 99% of our reps are like, great, pick a time on Monday or Tuesday. We're going to be at this location, you know, wherever that may be. You can come in and get your product serviced. And that was another big jump for us. Randy, another events rep. Denise is kind of a coordinator as well. She manages the south side of the division. So my division is about 8 hours long and about 14 hours wide. So it's very, very like spread out, and it's almost like these little islands, and it's a tough amount of territory for one person to manage. So Denise helps coordinate the bottom half, and then Brian, I would say, is like the main coordinator. He's doing a bulk of like the scheduling, the putting things together, the negotiating. She's just helping out with like a certain portion to make it a little bit more manageable. But she's also a great sales rep, has consistently done about 200K. And then Brian was a DM last year, tried to sell Cutco as a DM, qualified at both trips. So did just over 150, did over 200 as a new DM, and then was like, I can't do both, but I still want to stay in a leadership role. And I was like, do I have the job for you? Right. So he became the coordinator, and it's been great because he understands the value of our leadership program and why people selling at and getting to 50% and why that makes a really big difference when they're on the events team. So the value of going out and running a branch and learning those organizational skills and those people management skills, and why that is going to be helpful for them later. So he's on the same page, and you'll see a lot of these other guys that did over 100 grand and a handful other that did a little bit less. So that's really like kind of how it all broke down. But a lot of this business is from those events. Now, the other thing that I'd mentioned is creating like a business or a system, right? To where as a business owner, we're creating leverage, and we're able to create income based off of work being done when we're not necessarily needing to monitor that work consistently. So I do want to say, like, just to say, like, I don't just say, all right, now go, I'll never talk to you ever again. That's definitely not how this program works. But I thought it was really interesting when you broke down how your income is actually like created. And I was talking to an old DVM, and they had an Excel sheet. And I don't know if you guys have that document in front of you, but there is I've noticed that new business was very cyclical, right? So it's like we'd have a spike in January, and then it would dip, and then May, there'd be a lot of out, and then June and July would go up. August would start to go down. And then there were these seasons where I'm like, yes, this is great. We're having steak dinner. And then there were these other seasons where I'm like bologna sandwiches every night. And this was obviously as a new GM where I wasn't like fiscally responsible. And I'm like, well, how do we create more consistency in this income process? And if our teams are producing every week, not just during like certain seasons, but if they're producing every week, then obviously that's going to keep things going. And if you look at this, and you'll see there that my 1099, the gross income last year was just over 400. So hopefully you guys don't mind me sharing that. I don't know who's going to see this recording, but you're going to see the breakdown of what percentage these came from, right? And when I looked at the pilot performance bonus, the pilot CSP bonus, or pilot CSP performance, excuse me. So pilot CSP. And then we looked at campaign bonuses and pilot new business. Those main sources accounted for about $240,000 in income last year. So over half of the 1099 came from those primary sources, right? So this is, again, not to neglect new business because there's still a big value there. And we should have done significantly more in new business, right? Like I'm fully aware that that's an area of opportunity for our business. But what excites me is knowing that because of the campaign bonus, the CSP production, and what that does for the performance bonus, that's alone is about $150,000 in income. So for me, I'm like, well, this is an area of my business that can maintain, produce, and be consistent without needing a lot of my attention, right? And if I can cover those bases, now this is creating that lifestyle and that flexibility that I'm talking about. And our reps are really excited because now their income is also getting a lot higher as well. So, so you guys will see that. And actually, I sent you the Excel version of this as well. So you guys can even plug in your own numbers if you want. You may have to adjust the colors because I just kind of did it as I was going. And I think like DM performance bonus right here, that's still in the 4% range. So anyways, you guys will see that there. So as a DVM, I'm like, I need this program to like run. I want this to like roll. So, Nick asked me to put together a couple of different thoughts, and I'm going to start by talking about like the setup, right? So what do we do to set this up? Well, it's about creating that vision with your people and what you want. And I remember telling my original coordinator, he was like, so what's the goal? What are we going to do this first year? And that year that we did 75, right? And I took over in 2014, I'm like, I want to do 300 events this year. And he looked at me like I was on drugs. And he's like, how? And I'm like, that's why you're the coordinator and I'm the DVM, right? So I'm like, no, but I think that there's potential out there. So how, like, if we were to go for 300, right? Not can we, if 300 was the number, what would that look like? How would we go about doing that? What events would be included? Like, how could we do it? And that's always been, I think, a really an important mindset of mine is I don't usually ask like if, I usually just ask how. Like if there's something else being done throughout the company, I'm not going to question that it can be done. And even things that are like out of the air, like out of the realm of like what's being accomplished now. But I do constantly ask that question, how? And I think by asking that question, like, how can I get it done? How can I do this? It shifts my perspective to being very solution oriented. And it also helps my leadership team or who I'm working with also be solution oriented, right? So they do see the problem, but they're more focused on, well, what would we need to do in order to put these things in place? So, so the first thing that we did is we had our team start looking for every single potential sales opportunity out there. And I'm talking about anything. Farmers markets, boat shows, RV shows, home and garden shows, fairs, festivals, bluegrass festivals, Father's Day parade, like anywhere where there's going to be a gathering of people and there's going to be a vendor booth. My question to my coordinator was, can we put Cutco in there? Like, can we get Cutco there? And this will do a few things. The first thing that it does is obviously having more booths is going to increase the overall sales volume, but it also improves brand recognition. So when it comes to like recruiting, a lot of people are familiar with the product because they've seen it out and about. And that's good. We want to have product awareness. And I've noticed that more customers are going to be more apt to purchase when there's a familiarity with the product, right? And that's why, like, if you ever see the same ad on your Instagram or your Facebook feed over and over and over again, it's because they know you're not going to buy the first time. You're probably not going to buy the second, third, or fourth. But by the fifth time, you're going to click and you're going to look around. And you're like, okay, cool. And then they're going to keep showing you the ads over and over and over again. And for me, I wanted impressions of the product everywhere. And I knew that that was going to be good for all spectrums of the business, right? So I wanted that to be available. The other thing is that I noticed that within most towns, there's something happening every weekend, right? There's not like a big event every weekend, but there's usually something. And on the smaller events, usually that's something really small. Like we have a farmer's market that we partnered up with, and it was basically, it's every Thursday all summer long. So for 18 weeks, so it's 18 events, right? So every Thursday, and it's like $20 an event, right? So it's like, what does a rep have to do in order to be profitable at a $20 event? Well, they could sell a peeler for cash, and now they're already in the black, right, for multiple weeks, right? That's one option, but really it's just one thing. Like if they sell one order, they're okay. If they get one service call, they're okay. What's really funny though is like those farmers markets would go on to produce over the course of a campaign $17,000 in sales, right? And if it's the same one or two reps that are rotating or working that event, now that rep has consistent sales every single week. They're feeling good. The manager's feeling good. There's a lot of positive things that are coming from that. And it's a really low cost way to get exposure. And I think that's a great stepping stone for newer representatives that are on the team to go do those really low cost events. And then there's other smaller events, right? And I'm talking like boutique shows, or like, you know, your mom's got, you know, like a vendor day at work. Cool. Go set up a table at your mom's cafeteria and have at it, right? That's an event. And we want to make sure that everybody's on the events team the right way, so everybody's insured and all the liabilities are covered. But again, this is just going to help out. Now, as far as the training goes, we typically do some sort of training meeting for our new people and old people once every 2 months, where there's like a formal, we're going to get together, we're going to work on this. My coordinator, again, really into like giving back and helping. So he actually does do workshops every other Monday usually, where people can just come to his house and role play and drill for skill and things like that. So he does keep that open for people to train, but it's not like a requirement. Before big events, we usually do kind of like a cram session where we'll like drill for skill, and we'll like work on things where we'll have 1 or 2 days of additional training for people that are just working the state fair or just working our kiosk season, so that they're fully prepared to do those things. Here's a sample agenda too, where we'll go over just like making sure everybody's service call trained, how to do those things the right way, a little bit of sales tips, and a more like hands-on training and reviewing like the guidelines and the expectations. We then would go over like more hot news recognition and have some of our like big players speak, guys like Jeremy and Danny and Denise, people that are over 200 grand in sales for the year, so that they're able to share ideas. And then usually afterwards, there's some sort of team dinner or activity. So that's pretty much how that works. And usually that's a potluck. And by the way, do you guys have any questions about anything that I'm covering so far, or anything that I can clarify?
I think you're doing great. Are these meetings on Zoom since you have such a widespread territory?
No, that's a great question. We usually do them on Tuesdays. So if we are going to have this event, it's on a Tuesday. We do like getting people face to face. You know, Zoom, I think Zoom is great. And there's definitely elements of things that we will do on Zoom, but there's not a lot of replacement for the like having a booth in front of you and having the product hands-on and doing like an actual pitch where people can like actually give you feedback versus just talking to a screen. There's just a different feel. And I've also noticed a lot of camaraderie is built when there's like actual interaction, and it's the in-between, right? Like it's the hanging out. Like I've learned our relationship wasn't built just off of that conversation. It's like hanging out the company trips and grabbing dinner with our wives. Like that's where relationships and retention occurs. So I want that interaction. So, and everybody's okay if it's just once every 2 weeks. A lot of these guys are not heavily involved in their office where they're coming in every single week for team meetings. So this is kind of like their team meeting, if you will. So I found that the shelf life for like keeping things like, you know, all kosher or whatever, like everything okay, is 6 to 8 weeks. Anything over 8 weeks, and it's like things start to really get like spicy, right? People are like, I need this, or like this isn't going right, or the coordinator booked me wrong. And it's just, we need that interaction. I found that anything less than 6, so 2 is a little bit too frequent. So they find that you're like, oh, I was already there, it's too much or whatever. So I found that that's kind of the sweet spot. So so as far as like onboarding goes and like who we bring on, I think the most important thing is your coordinator for this program. Very similar to running your pilot, the most important person in the pilot, aside from the DVM, is obviously the pilot sales manager, or the DOM, right? So that person will make your life either heaven or hell. If you have a great pilot manager, life is good. If you don't, life can be a little stressful, right? It could be a little bit like, you don't have that trust that things are getting done right. And it's that lack of trust that creates a lot of conflict for us, because again, while we're idle and not involved, we're worried that things aren't being done the right way. And that creates like an unnecessary, like negative feeling. Similarly, if you have the wrong person in the coordinator role, that feeling is going to be there as well. So initially I thought, well, this person is the best in the booth. They have the best averages. They close the highest amount. They work the most events. They're the most talented person. So they should be the coordinator. And that is wrong, because that person is a great, talented salesperson, because that's where their strengths lie, not necessarily in people management and leadership. Me and my coach referred to this person as like the talented terror, right? Where they're so talented, but just not really the best at like working and playing nice. It's kind of like the all-star, athlete that's really great at playing, but not the best at coaching, right? So I wanted someone that wasn't necessarily like the best. They didn't have to be. It'd be great if they were, but I wanted somebody that had a really strong understanding of the fundamentals of how to do the job and why each person would benefit from being on the team, and also how our programs work together, right? Why branching's good, why CGC is good, why CSPs are good, why all the different levels of our business would work together and be like a cohesive organization. So when I onboarded my manager or my coordinator, I let them know specifically like what my goals were, how many offices I wanted, what my deployment plan was, what my plan is with all of my different people in my organization. So that way there's no conflict with, it's like, well, I need this person working a show. And it's like, well, hey, where they're at in their career, the leadership academies and the development process is more important than one event. Now, next year, when they're over 150 grand in sales and they're making 50% and they're on the sales road, absolutely, like I'd be willing to compromise that, but not in the beginning, right? Because it's the stepping process. So he's like understanding this process, which is really, really important that we're again all on the same page. So then the next priority was making sure that there was a tiered system to prioritize our highest performers, so that they don't feel like they're being undercut by the new people, but also protecting the new people from being exposed to really high show costs that can just eat somebody alive if they have a couple of bad shifts and they're not good at bouncing back, right? So like if I have a guy like Danny who goes out and has a bad event, I'm not worried, because I know Danny's going to go figure out a way to sell 10 grand or 20 grand this month anyways. Like I'm okay with him having a bad shift. If I have a rep that's never had a 10K month and they go out there on one of our best shows and they incur like a $200 fee and they didn't sell anything, that person is going to be like devastated. It's a different feeling to that person. So I want to make sure that we're protecting them. So our tiered shows are broken down to where if they did over 10 grand last year, that's a tier 1. If an event did between 5 and 10 grand, that's a tier 2. And then if they did less than 5, they're a tier 3. The events can slide up and down from year to year. And then so if you're eligible, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically going to get that, because sometimes people go up and sometimes people go down on the tier system for what's available. But that's typically how we want to protect our people. And you'll see that to be a tier 1 rep, you have to be at least over $150,000 in sales and sold 75 grand last year. So there's definitely a high level of performance, and they also can't exceed $4,000 in liability. So we pick that number because there's certain events where they will rack that up, but they'll also sell 20 or 30 grand during that event. So we know that it's going to be okay. And we also make sure that they have a voluntary or an events withholding to help offset any payments or charges that will go through. And almost all of our charges are done on a 6-pay. So they're charged over 6 weeks. Then our premier representatives, all right, or tier 2, are reps that are over $30,000 in sales. This could be of the same year or just in total sales. And they can't occur over $1,000 in liability. So for a rep that's making 40%, we want to make sure that they do not get too far into debt, right? So we're protecting them. And then anybody that's over 20 can begin working shows, but we have like, let some 10, 12, 15, 13K reps, like those guys, we've let them work like the $20 farmers market. We've let them work like the little church boutique bazaar, right? Or whatever they have going on. So we're going to let them do that if it's like a low cost, very like high reward, low risk sort of situation. And then, as far as the continued onboarding, we want to make sure that everybody has the appropriate displays. So if they're going to start working events, we want them to have an entire booth. We realize that this is a large investment. So most of them will not do this until they're over $30,000 in sales or have run a branch. And I'm totally okay with that. But we do expect that somebody who is going to like work with another FSM or CSP or somebody that's working in the event, that they at least have all the knives and all the specialty pieces, right? We want them to be able to display everything in their spot. The other thing is we want to make sure they're service call trained. We usually start the conversation about people getting and learning how to sharpen between 6 and 15K. I think it's case by case. If somebody's been working for a while and they got to 6K, I think that's okay. I'm not really a big fan of getting somebody a sharpener, like if they just had a 6K fast start. I want them to have more experience with the business. And obviously, if they got off to a hot start, there's a good chance that their network is still going to allow them to do traditional demos. And I want them to get as much experience before we just throw them out there to the fast pace of event sales, right? And then again, we want to protect their profitability, which is always a big thing for us. So any questions on that, by the way? So I did include our events guidelines, and all of this stuff is broken down in the events guidelines, so you guys can see that on there. And then the ongoing communication really does vary rep to rep. I think that each person I'm going to work with differently. So with my CGCs, it's pretty infrequent communication and not a lot of business talk. When I say it's not a lot of business talk, like there's nothing that I'm going to teach a $500,000 sales rep on how to be better at selling Cutco. I can offer some insight and some questions on how to develop their business, but I'm definitely not going to teach them any sales techniques, right? So it's not so much me like being directive and guiding that way. It's more of just like, how's everything going and how can I support you? So I really take on the role as a supporter in those relationships. And if they need help or if they, want to make a contest, I am like very eager to accommodate and help them out. When I think about a guy like Jeremy, who did $500,000, right? So $500,000 in sales to a division manager, right? So you're getting 5% in there on the office, 3% on the division overrides, not to mention the bonus levels that come into play. I mean, this person is more valuable than a district manager in my division, to my organization. So if he wants to make a contest, totally cool. So we made a contest and he got to 500,000. So we're going to Lululemon. So that was like one of the contests. So I would never make a Lululemon contest with anybody else, but he's obviously earned it. But I've also done other things. Like I've bought Raider tickets for people. I've gotten surround sound systems for people. I let somebody do like $1,000 shopping spree with Cutco because they had like an 80K month. And it's like, if they're going to have an 80K personal sales month, yeah, I'm going to take care of you, right? But I would never buy somebody a surround sound system for a 10K push, right? That just like profitably doesn't make sense. But I want these guys to know that I'll take care of them and I'm going to help them out. So I'm willing to accommodate and make those contests as they're requested. So that's with like my really high performers. And with most of my 100Kers, there's those occasional events, there's the events meetings. And then they'll also come to a lot of our division meetings. They'll come to a few like FSM meetings in my office, where we'll do that like once a month, where it's totally open invite. They can come together, they can share ideas. I'll usually go to this like sushi place that's around the corner that does like happy hour and appetizers. So it's like, you know, it's going to cost me less than $50, but everybody gets a beer and they get like, fried tempura or whatever, and they're just chatting. And it's like, it's a good vibe because it's loose, but they also get a chance to share, connect, and talk about business. And then usually that's right before a team meeting, so they can come back in and like, offer some insights and help if they would like to. And then anybody under 100K, they're at everything, right? They're coming to Leadership Academy. They're going to the events meetings. They're going to their team meetings. They are in. And I am like a big fan of that. Micromanage, keep them involved as much as they can early on, and then giving them the wings to fly. And a lot of times they're going to tell you they have the wings to fly way sooner than they actually do. So I'm very leery to let them jump out of the nest unless I know for sure they can fly. And it's rare, because in my experience of selling Cutco, I really didn't know how to sell Cutco until I was over 100 grand in sales. I mean, like, I knew how to do the demo, I knew how to close, but I didn't know how to sell anything. I didn't know any psychological or psychology behind closing. I didn't know like any of the big elements of like how to be an effective salesperson until I got to about that level. And by then, most of those people are either taking the leadership, like management, run a branch, run a district, or they're taking the route to become a CSP, CGC, something along those lines. So either way, I'm going to be excited, but I want them to be very involved. And like, we just recently had an events meeting, or a CSP appreciation day. We had everybody come together. We had like a day of like them sharing and giving guidance. I had a financial coach come in from Rising Stock that gave them some like tax advice. I also had a Tony Robbins speaker, like, so one of those guys came in and talked about attaining peak performance. Afterwards, we went out to teppanyaki. That's where they like, cook in front of you and they make the volcano out of the onions. And then we went and did an escape room afterwards. So it was like just a really fun day, and I paid for all of it. It was definitely like a more expensive day. I think it cost me like $1,000, $1,500 or something, but it was well worth it because I had a chance to hang out with these guys, and I'd like to do that once every 6 months, at least once a year. But depending on the year and like, how many kids I'm having that year, it does kind of play a role on my availability. The other really cool thing that we did in that event is we had everybody like talk about their word. And I bought this thing called My Intent. And it's basically a bracelet maker where you can customize the letters on it. So it just looks like a little washer, and it has like the word on the circle. I bought it online. It was like $100. And then during the event, everybody picked their words. So it's like, we had like some of the newer guys, their words were like commit and gratitude. Some of my FSMs and CSPs, they had words like energy, conquer, moment, connection, intentional. So it's just a reminder of like what they're focused on this year. And I thought it was really interesting because Jeremy last year, we gave him an opportunity to talk at this event. And I'm like, what did you do to grow from 220 to 300 or to $500,000 in sales, right? Because he grew more than almost everybody else in the division, right? Like, he grew more than what everybody else sold in the division, except with the exception of Eric. Eric did 400,000, but the next person down, he grew more by like just that than what he did. I'm like, what did you do differently? He said, I really analyzed where I was at in my life, and I recognized that this is a great business, but I started with why. I asked myself, like, what the hell am I doing as a 41-year-old selling knives? Like, what is my purpose here? Like, why am I doing this? And it was really interesting to see that question start to spin around in everybody's head around the table, right? It was like a round table discussion, and we're all talking, and he's like, because I've been doing it for a long time. He's been doing it longer than I've been selling Cutco. He's won a silver cup before. He's gotten a lot of accolades and performance awards and all that stuff. So he's like, what's my why? And he really like took it off of himself and onto serving people and helping his customers and creating, better systems for the people that he does business with, and just being a better servant from his position of selling. And his goal was to serve a certain number of customers. And I think that number was 300. And because of his averages, right, like, he ended up having this phenomenal sales year. He's like, but it was never about a sales goal. I never set a goal to sell 500,000. My goal was to serve 300 new customers here and 100 customers here. And that was what I was trying to do. And it was really interesting because then I was talking to him, I'm like, so what's everybody's goals this year? And he's like, and this year my goal is to do more. I want to do 200 more. So initially I was like kind of leery on the idea on banking on him growing. Like I actually did my business plan with him doing 100K less, right? Like I felt like this was such an outlier year that he wouldn't actually grow. But based off of the way that he's approaching his business, his position of gratitude, and how he wants to help and give back and speak at meetings and talk to everybody in this group, I realized like this guy is going to go on to do amazing things this year. And I'm looking at his numbers. He's already sold more in January and February than he did last January and February. And I'm like, he was not playing around, you know? And I invited him to come over to the fights this weekend. I do a lot of hangout with those guys too. Come over, watch the fights. I have a pool table. There's like a bar in my living room with a pool table. So it's almost like a little mini pub, like where people just hang out and stuff. So we'll usually like have events where people can just come hang. And he's like, hey, I'd love to hang. Thanks for the invite, but I got to work this weekend. I got an event and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And they're just like, they're really focused on what they're trying to accomplish. And I do anticipate that this group of CSPs will do, they did $2 million for my top leaders last year. They did just over 2 million. I would project they'll do about 2.5 to 2.7 this year, just based off of the direction that they're going. And a lot of that has to do with this events team. And that was really the foundation to help level everybody up. So I put in there a few other like documents that you guys can see. One of them is the 2020 schedules and stat sheets, and it's broken down in 3-month increment. 2 to 3 month increments. And you'll see on there all of the events that we've either done or currently have pending for every single week of the year. And if you look at there's 5 breakdowns. I think one of them is a little bit longer because it's a slower season, but every single one of those 5 tabs has roughly 100 events on it. So these are like our prospective events where we have about 500 opportunities to go sell. And that doesn't include the addition of the service events that would be included on top of any new events that we work. So we're still looking for more opportunities to sell. And for many of the events that we had last year doing 300, there were still events that we had to say no to because we didn't have enough people on the team, or we just had another function that was conflicting. So our goal is to continue to grow and achieve more events because we know that that's going to be the thing that's going to take it to the next level. But also like our average event did less than $4,000. So we're like, well, if we can get to a $5,000 average, that's also another really big way that we can grow doing the same amount of events to get to 1.5. And if we can get to 6 or 7 or maybe even 12, like Texoma, I believe you guys is a $12,000 average. I was doing the numbers and I'm like, oh man, if we did $12,000 average on 300 events, what that would look like, right? And I'm just like, yeah, I like the idea of a $3.6 million show team. That sounds pretty exciting. So anyways, that's pretty much what we do in NorCal, and what's really been a great like baseline for my division every single year that's allowed us to just continue to grow and obviously, help everybody, including our district leaders and division managers. So.
I love everything that you covered, just well documented, well outlined with the documents. And it just seems like there's a theory and a community built around the culture of just relationships, of just growth, of just community. And I really, really love that. So does anybody have any questions for Jaymison? Jaymison, my question would be, what is the communication to your DMs about the promotion of the events team? I think that a lot of times in the pilot and our people, I've noticed we're really good at talking about it because we've got a lot of the CSP leadership and growth, but is there like a vision of like an FSM in every single district territory? Is there an attitude of any like, hey, here's when we start communicating, here's why this would benefit your district?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I took over the division, everybody like automatically like the way that I took over the division was because there was a lot of people that left, there was a lot of people displaced, and they all just kind of came into the pilot like quickly. Within 8 months, I'm like, that's not the way we're going to do things, right? So I was almost like Oprah with FSMs. I'm like, you get an FSM and you get an FSM and you get an FSM. And the theory behind this was, again, to help my district managers create a baseline of income, but also hit those campaign bonuses, which makes a big difference in their profit margins. And I didn't want to hoard it all. You know, like I grew up in an environment where the DVM would scoop up an FSM and they would stay there forever. And they'd scoop another one and they'd stay there forever. And it was like one of those things where I always kind of scratched my head wondering, like, how, like, do they take into consideration how that impacts just like the trust in the organization? So everybody that's running an office right now has a CSP or an FSM that does at least $100,000, if not $200,000 in business. So I want that to happen. And then the communication actually starts from me letting them know like what the goal is. And then secondary to that, I have my coordinator actually talk to the district managers at staff meetings and let them know an update on how things are going and what's to happen. And he'll go over like how to communicate to up and comers. So like one of the things that we tell them not to promote is that, hey, when you get on the events team, you'll get to stand at a table and people just walk up and buy Cutco from you. Because that's not how it works. They got to like develop a new skill and they got to be a little bit better and they got to make sure that they know what they're doing. So we talk about how like, hey, once you've reached this benchmark, you can start training and you can open the discussion about it. So we give them like something to work towards before we even open the conversation. And that conversation is always going to include the coordinator so that everybody's on the same page. I think congruency and communication is so important. And you know, as you guys all know, like, you know, with our significant others, our family, our kids or whatever, it's always better to over communicate versus under communicate. So we're going to be as clear as possible about like exactly what to say, not what to say. And I want it coming directly from the person's mouth who's going to be coaching and guiding these people. So.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you very much. I've seen that before happen as well. And we want to make sure we get those guys in each territory. So any other questions, guys? All right. Awesome.
Well, hey, Evan, thanks again. I really appreciate being able to share about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. Thank you.
All right. See you.